Hey guys, I'm going to do a beginner tutorial. So if you're intermediate or advanced, probably don't need this, but just got that feeling that there's some people out there that might need it. So if you start off with basically nothing, you're just searching YouTube for Blender type stuff. Well, here you go. Let's start out like this. Type in Blender Launcher in any search engine, and you'll get something called the Blender Launcher from GitHub. Go ahead and grab that for Windows or Linux, whatever you've got. And once you've got that installed, you'll see something like this. You have a library, downloads, and then a user area. You'll have stable, daily, and experimental. Now, when you have library selected, you'll have all of the versions that you've already downloaded. When you have download selected, these will be downloads that are actually available to you right now. So once you get something like the stable version on your library, you can download. I wouldn't use anything less than 3.5, and 3.5 is a little bit buggy. So I would just go ahead and click launch once you get that. And one quick tip, go into the settings and make sure to click to launch when the system starts. Otherwise, you end up having some problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blank out this version. I'm going to load the factory settings. This is basically what you start off with. There's literally nothing. Blender is completely blank. And you don't want to start modeling right away because it's just going to be tedious. So what you want to do is get a nice setup going first, and I'm going to help you do that. So let's go to Edit. Let's go to Preferences. And under the Preferences and Add-ons, you'll see a list. There'll be a number of different things you want to have enabled so that you can function in Blender. Now I'm going to go down the list of the default Blender add-ons that you're going to need. So if you kind of scroll down a little bit, you'll start seeing stuff like the curve tools and the extra objects. You can go ahead and start checking these on. There's a add curve ivy generator. It's extremely useful and still very relevant. There's a sapling tree generator. You can turn these on. You're not really going to lag out the software by turning all these little add-ons to the on position. It's just not that big of a deal. The ANT landscape, very powerful tool. You can just instantly create landscapes with it with a lot of modifications. So you don't really need to know anything about Blender to create that. And then you can have the bolt factory. The bolt factory is going to, if you hit Shift A over here, you'll see you have a bolt now, and then you'll have a landscape. And the landscape tool will bring up a little landscape. It just kind of popped in here. And if you don't know anything about moving in a 3D viewport, middle mouse will pan, shift and middle mouse will kind of move everything. And then middle mouse zooms. And then also, and I won't go too complex, you can hit Control middle mouse to do an in-depth zoom. It's really cool. And then G will grab an object, but we don't want to do that because there's a drop-down menu right here. And I'll just move this to the side for now. I'll kind of go over these one by one very gently. Got a lot of operator presets. If you want this to be a mesa, you can turn it to a mesa. Be careful with subdivisions and things like that, but you can just leave this static just to kind of play with it until you get used to it. And if I hit /, all that's gone, but you'll be able to see a nice close-up of the landscape it created. You can bring this back over. And we'll just go over a few things here. You got the extra objects. This combobulator, if you wanted to use that, you can use it. And a lot of this is going to be harbored under the Shift A menu. You got the discombobulator. And this is going to be something you can add to a mesh. So if I hit Shift A and added the discombobulator, I could begin adding some different items to it to kind of like jumble it up and make some abstract things. It's actually quite cool and very useful. And so all basic setup, you don't have to understand anything that's going on yet. Now, The global transforms, yeah, you could turn that on. There's a lot of this you really just don't need as a beginner or even intermediate. Import brush set, you can turn that on. So that way, later when you're using some different add-ons that are, using baking and painting, stuff like that, it'll be important. And you can import palettes. And then this is very important, to import images as planes. Okay, so one of those things you would do is you would download an image, and then you can import now images as planes. And what that's going to do is you can put a picture in the background. Basically, it's going to be a plane, but you can use it as a background. But we won't go through every little tiny thing, just kind of get you guys started. Now this one's tricky. 3D viewport pie menus. If you bring down the drop down on this, you'll see hotkeys that will give you these different pie menus that are the animation. One's for transforms, one is to make alignments, and so on down the list. I wouldn't recommend turning all of these on until you get a little bit better at Blender. I'm going to turn these off. Dynamic brush menus. You could turn that on now, but we'll just leave that off. Now, dynamic sky, that one's pretty important. Sun position, try lighting, that can be turned on. The 3D print toolbox can be turned on. It's very basic. We'll go over that. And then the auto mirror can be turned on. So let's go to the dynamic sky. That one's pretty interesting. So I'll hit Shift A in the menu here. Just kind of left click because we haven't set anything up yet. So if you Shift A, you can drop in what's called mesh primitives. You get a plane, a cube, you get circle, a UV sphere, an icosphere, cylinder, a cone, and a torus. And from these shapes, you can create pretty much anything. So that's a general idea. So if you just drop in a plane, it's going to pop in at the world origin. And here we can hit S, and that'll scale it up. Now with this still selected, you can now hit G to grab it, and then Z to lock it into an access point, and then hold Shift to kind of slow down that transition as you go, and then left click to place it. Now you'll learn a lot as you go through. Try not to make this tutorial too long, but just kind of give you a good setup and a good starting point. So that way you've got everything ready to go. All right, so you have an N panel, so press N. And if it doesn't come up, just left click somewhere in the 3D view. And your N panel will pull up here. Now you see dynamic sky right here. If you turn that off, you can see what it does. Obviously, it just turns it on and off, but it's kind of good to see, hey, you just added something. And now you get a general idea of when you add something, where you might look to go find it, being somewhere in these different menus here, or possibly in different workspaces we'll go over. So you can go ahead and click Create, and you get a little double arrow right here. You can left click, hold, and drag it out if you can't see it. It just said, please select the world named Dynamic 1 from the property menus under World. If you come down here, you have World Properties. And from here, you can select the background. So if you just come right here, you have a little drop-down menu. You click on it, you see Dynamic 01. We won't click on it just yet. So I want to go from the basic solid view. And I'm not going to go to material preview. I'm going to go all the way to the rendered view, which is going to show cycles. And cycles is a pretty useful view because that's very realistic lighting calculated for you. So that's probably one of those things you want to stick with as a beginner. Then you'll have a couple of settings here that are indicative of whatever you selected. So if you selected material preview, you have settings for it. You select solid view, you'll have settings for solid view. Go to rendered, you'll have rendered views. Don't hit pause by accident. If you do, you're pausing the 3D viewport and it won't do anything, which is going to be infuriating. Make sure to click play. So come down, and you can have scene lights on or off. It doesn't really matter, but you do have one static light in the scene. So just as a beginner, just going to leave that alone. Make sure you have scene world turned on so you can see this thing. So now come down here and select dynamic 1. And what's going to do is going to put a sky background for you, which is extremely useful. And for some reason, it took a little bit of time for that to pop up. I kind of had to click off and click back on something there. But this is the control setup for you. You could change the background colors and go with something like a darker blue. And then the horizon color, you could change that as well. It seems to be going pretty slow for some reason, but that's all right. And then the cloud color can be changed as well. You could change the cloud opacity, which means just how much it shows up, how much of it you can see. And go to my render settings here. Because I started a brand new deal here. Okay, I'm on CPU. Let me go to GPU rendering. And don't worry, we'll set all this up too. I just need the GPU on, so that way it can work in my favor. And actually, let's take a minute here. Come back and select the material library. You select the material utilities. And you can click on the mesh edit tools. We'll just go ahead and finish this real quick. Click on loop tools. And these are just the ones you're going to have. Click on node arrange, presets, and wrangler. Click on align tools, the bool tool. Click on the carver tool, which is a built-in hard surface modeling add-on, just comes free with Blender. Let's see, you could turn on cell fracture just in case you run across that later and you want to use it. Be careful with real snow. You turn that one on. It's going to pop up over here as well, end panel. We can turn on the scatter, the sharpen, object color rules, all that's fine. Paint palettes, definitely want that on for later use, so you don't want to have to like try to go back and find these things later because it's real tedious. I went through a lot of that. All right, screencast keys, I should actually have that on. You don't have that one. That's actually something I downloaded so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Gonna bring this up a touch so you can see me as I move. So you'll see a little display here when I click something and you'll kind of see what's going on. Bring the mouse size up just a touch. All right, you don't have text tools, but you can go find that one and turn that one on too. Now you see a save preferences here. Don't exit out until you saved. And then go ahead and make sure that auto save is on. And when that's on, you should be good. Now what we want to do is go to the interface. You can turn on developers extras. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you an experimental option here. And then if there's anything going on, the experimental stuffs, you can grab that. Let's go to system. And you want to turn your undo steps up to something like 100 and hit enter. And if that little asterisk is right there, that means you have to save because you haven't saved yet. And I'm not sure why the auto save isn't showing. I'm gonna go back to add-ons, type in auto, because I've not had that as a problem. And that's the thing with version 3.5. I wouldn't use it. Just go to the next version. And so you could type in modifier tools too. and turn on the modifier tools. And maybe it's under preferences. It's very interesting that that's not just auto saving. That's okay though, just make sure to save. And so back to the interface. Everything looks good here. Now, one thing you want to think about doing is going to the key map. And this is how everything's going to work in Blender. So if you right click, you'll have some of the most basic and useful options, which is shade flat, shade smooth, auto shade smooth, copy pasting objects, mirroring, snapping. All that's fine, but it's really kind of benign. There's no reason. There's only like 3 or 4 things in here you're ever really going to use. So I turn my select mouse button to right. So that way I can right click objects. It just makes a lot of sense. And then automatically you're able to left click and move the 3D cursor around, which is going to be something that's very instrumental to quickly modeling. So that's an incredibly more powerful way to do Blender. Now, the spacebar action is going to be set to play by default, which is for this timeline. So if you hit spacebar, it plays, but that's not very useful when you could set it to search. So when you press spacebar, now you could type in pretty much anything. So if you were looking for the shade smooth that we just had on the context menu, you just type in shade and you'll get shade smooth, flat, and auto smooth, those options. So it's very easy. And while we're here, hit spacebar, type in shade, and then go to shade flat and click add to quick favorites. Go to shade smooth, right click and add to quick favorites, and then go to shade auto smooth and add that to the quick favorites. Now if you hit Q, you've started to develop an an object menu. So if you go into edit mode, which is one of the other main modes you use, that won't be there. So if I if I hit tab, you can see everything changes from object to edit mode if I hit tab. Now if I hit Q, nothing's there, so don't be disturbed. You just have to build your search menu the other way. Okay, so now you've got a quick menu started with some of those very important things. It's just not a big deal. Get rid of them. Make sure to save. If you don't have the autosave on, that's actually quite tedious that it's not doing that. All right, so let's X out. You got a lot of things set up already, so you don't want to lose any of it. So let's go to File. Let's come down to Defaults. Be very careful because they put load factory settings right next to Save Startup File. So click Save Startup File, then don't move your mouse. You'll have to click it again. Now every time you open Blender, it's going to open up exactly like this with the dynamic sky and a menu, everything. And then if you don't want that, you could come back over to the gray, the solid view, and delete these few things. Hit Shift S and bring cursor to world origin. If it's not, may take a couple times every now and then. Hit Shift A and then drop a cube in, and then go to File, Defaults, and save your startup file. So now when you go to restart, click a new general, don't save, it's going to open up exactly where you left off, which is cool. And so if you had something open that you wanted, then you could, jump right back into it. Now we'll have to go back into the edit preferences, go to system. Now if you have a device, a 3D GPU, a 3D graphics accelerator, then you go ahead and click on it. I've got an optics NVIDIA. Don't select both. If you have like an i9 core like I do, which is just the CPU, so just select the GPU because there'll be other options for that later. And then I have to keep saving preferences just the way it is. Now what we could do is come over into the render properties right here. And we're set to cycles as the render engine. For the most part, you'll be on GPU. Viewport samples, you can click on denoise if you want. I'm going to have that off so that it looks something like that. And it did save my dynamic sky, but that's okay. I could probably go back to create and make those a little less harsh, and then bring down the sun value to 0.5. And in fact, let's not do that. I'll show you another trick. Once I fix all these colors back to something very basic, I hit N to get rid of that. Now, if you come over here, you're in the cycles area, you're in the render engine, middle mouse will go all the way down to color management, drop that down, and then bring it on again. If you grab exposure, this is going to be the way you want to darken your scene. Don't change the actual light values. Let's switch the look to high contrast and leave it on filmic, and that should be good for most of your renders. And if something's a little too dark, then you can bring that exposure value back up. But a lot of times, because of the way 3D modeling works, you want to show shadows and different things, so it looks cool. So if I right click on this cube and hit tab, I'll go into edit mode, and then I can hit 1, 2, or 3 on the number pad. One will be vertex select, which just selects these little points in space here. I'll go back to solid view and see it. And these are important because a number of them will make up a face. 3 or 4 of them will make up a face. And if I go to edge select or 2 on the number pad, I can select an individual edge and hit Control B and add a chamfer. And I can roll the middle mouse wheel up to something hopefully like an even number, left click, place it, and make a bevel. Then you get a drop down. You can set the segments to an even number, and the rest of this you could pretty much leave the way it is. You could turn on hard and normals if it looks funky, which end up being shading errors. So if I hit tab again, I'll come back out and I've got all these little ridges. I don't want those, so hit Q and then hit your shade auto smooth. And that's going to shade it smooth and auto smooth it for you automatically at a 30-degree angle, which will work for most, probably work for most meshes. So that looks pretty good. And I'll go back over into the rendered view, so now you kind of see what's going on. Let's go back up. Your viewport is here. It's your sampling menu. You viewport and render. You have a max, you have a noise threshold. You could leave that where it is for now as a beginner. And your samples is how many samples is this going to take to render out. And so if you have your lighting and other things and your resolution good, you don't need that many samples. So for slower PCs and things like that, you can go to something like 100 samples. You don't have to do 5,000 because it's kind of ridiculous and overkill. I'm going to drop down my denoiser here. And then instead of the open image denoise, I'm going to select my optics, which is going to make everything much faster. And you can leave the passes where it is. Now, if you're in 3.5 or higher, you'll have Light Tree. And Light Tree calculates different ambient lights in the scene, which is good. Now, if you switch, you can switch from supported to experimental. And anything you turned on or anything you used up to this point, like the developer extras or something, will give you the option to use that. So if you're finding out that there's some special feature you're using and it's not working, it's because you're not on experimental. I'll just switch mine back to supported. And if you go to CPU compute, you'll get path guiding. And in simplest terms, path guiding is just a different way to calculate light off of the diffused surfaces. Much, much slower because it will only use your CPU. And currently there is no GPU support for that, but it's coming very soon. I'm pretty sure that in Blender 4.0 they're going to have it because we're at 3.6 and they're going to skip 3.7. And so this is very basic stuff. I've actually got a tutorial on that. You can search my channel. I've got a tutorial based on all the light paths and everything. But just real quick, if you had 128 samples here for your training samples, which will better calculate where light is and bouncing in the scene. So instead of using old school ray tracing, which is going to be under GPU. CPU will select path guiding if you have it turned on. So you would want more samples to be taken, like here. 256 would make a lot more sense. So that way it trains up to 128, and this you want to max out at 256. So you could put 256 here, which is overkill, you don't need it, and then put 512 here. And those are just the mathematical numbers it recognizes. And I think that'll work out good for you. So you have that set up, and let's just say this was your general setup and everything. You can come back over here and save that again as a startup file. And so that way you don't lose all the hard work you just did going through here. Because if you don't, you're going to have to adjust this every single time, and that doesn't make any sense. All right, so we turned on 3-point lights. I'll show you that. I'm going to Shift A and drop in a plane. And if you hit 1, let me go here. Okay, I can't do that because I'm on a laptop. I'll have to go back into Edit, go to Preferences. So if you're on a laptop, this is going to help you. And I'll go into Key Map. Excuse me. Not there. Okay, Input. There we go. So it's under Input. I want to emulate the number pad, which will give you the top row in your keyboard. And the top row on the keyboard, don't forget to save, will give you the ability to hit 1 and get front facing. 2 will give you an offset. 3 from the side. 4 an offset. 5 an offset. 6 an offset. 7 is a top view. 0 will be the camera view. But if you want to switch, you can hit Control-Alt-0. Okay, you can right click and grab the camera and hit G and move it around, or you can move it on access points like Z up and down. If you hit Z again, you'll move in forward. So it goes from global to local kind of automatically if you do it this way, that way you don't have to keep switching stuff. So G and Y, and then the other Y, and then X, and then X. And so it moves that way. So you can kind of do things like that. It's always a good idea not to center your objects either. It doesn't look good. All right. Now with all of that done, you can also hit Control-1, give you the opposite side, and then 3 was the side. Control-3 will give you another side, and so on down the line. So if 7 is the top, then Control-7 is the bottom, respectively, as you can see. Now if you have multiple objects in the scene, and I can just grab this object, right-click, and Shift-D, left-click, grab it again, Shift-D, or just keep this one selected, Shift-D. These are duplicates. So if I just click over here under Shading, I'm under Studio and Material. I can go from Material to Random. And now I'll be able to see where the other ones begin and where the other ones end. Now if you want to create an instance and save memory, hit Alt-D. Just remember, these are likely going to be tied together as an instance with materials. So just keep that in mind. So if one changes color, I'll go back. Actually, let's go to Material Preview now. We haven't used it. I'll grab the center object. This is your material properties. This is where you can add colors. So I'll click New, add a new color, make it yellow. You see all 3 of those became the same color. But if I come over here and add a new material and make this one blue, well, that's just going to be blue. And then click here, new material. And if you want to change that to a specific shader, which is the surface shaders where we're at, you can click here and you could turn this into something like a glass BSDF. Okay. And that will turn it into a glass material, which is much better seen, if you will, in Cycles. So if you come over, because the Eevee engine, in order to make that work, is a little bit more tricky. I'll go back to render, go back to GPU, so it keeps up. And then you'll have a sort of a glass material here. It would require some more adjustments for the index of refraction. Put it to 1.3. You can put it to 0.8 or 0.9, make it a little bit more clear. It's kind of hard to tell. No big deal though. So that is just about it. Let's see. This will get you started. If you want to shift A and drop anything in, you've got a mesh menu. And over here under mesh, you've got curves, surface, meatball, ellipsoid, caps. There's a bunch of different things. You can put in text. Text is really cool. We'll drop a text in. I'll show you how to work that real quick. Let me just delete that, and I never put my plane up, shame on me. Hit G and Z to move it down just a touch. So if you grab the text and jump into edit mode by pressing tab, you can hit backspace and write something in there. Something like, I'll put my YouTube tag on there, and then you hit tab again. And when you do that, you're in object mode. You can see the different modes here. Click on the little icon down there, the A, and then you can come over to the geometry and you can extrude that. It's really cool. And if you scroll down, you'll see you have a bunch of other options here. I don't want to get too far off, but just so you understand some of the options you have. You have lights. You can put in your 3-point light. That's important to know. Come over here. You can see the shadows. It's actually pretty nice. Whatever object is selected with the 3-point light is going to get the 3-point light. So if you hit Shift A, drop in the 3-point light, it's going to drop it in at the origin point, unfortunately, for this. And I didn't move the origin point because it's technically not a mesh. You would have to take this as an object and you would have to convert this to a mesh. Now it's converted to a mesh. And this is more complex, but you would go here under object, and you want to set the origin and the origin to geometry. And it moves those lights over. As you can see, they just moved over, which is cool. So now in this mode, you can come over here and see your different lights. You've got tri-lamp. You've got tri-lamp back, fill, and key. So if you can select these, the light bulb should pop up. If it doesn't, then you just come in here and click on it. The power is at 1.5 watts. You can left click, drag that over, and you'd be surprised how much it actually takes to brighten the area up. You can change the color of said light. You can just select the light here. You can scale the size of it and diffuse it more. You change the color. The power, you could type in kind of like whatever you want, something like 5,000. And carefully you don't wash out the whole scene. So I would take this down to like 2,500. And there you go. That's it. And now R is going to rotate things. Let me get back into solid. Let's go over actually a little bit of rotations and things like that. So if you hit R, it's just going to rotate on a basic origin point. You hit Z, it'll constrain it to the Z axis, X, and then Y. And respectively, all of these you can do the same thing with. And here's a little trick. If you grab one of these and hit middle mouse and right mouse at the same time, you can constrain it on all the different access points. And then let go and it will end up there. If you want to bring objects to objects, I'm going to select this one and I want to bring it here. So in order to do that, I can hit Shift S, and this is a pretty powerful menu. It's just static in Blender, so we're just going over the most basic things possible. I can bring the selected to the active. So the last object you selected is going to be the active. So if I do that, then it's going to snap it over here to that object, which is cool. Now if the 3D cursor, which is this little gizmo here, is in the center, then it'll snap there. But wherever it is, if I grab this object and hit Shift S, I can take that selected to the cursor and center it, which is very useful actually, because the 3D cursor is like your starting point for a lot of stuff. So if I hit Shift A, I can now drop in a UV sphere, it's selected. You can see the sphere, and you can double click to rename things. Doesn't hurt anything. And hit S to kind of scale that up, and then bring that inside the mesh. Something like that. Nice and basic. Actually, we go over a little bit of snapping too. You turn on snap, a little magnet here. It's set to increment. So if I move this now, it's going to move in little increments. It's not really going to attach to anything. If I go to select face project and align rotation to target, and now hit G, it's going to snap perfectly to whatever object is in proximity. It's real important to realize that. It's going to be proximity. So what I'll do is I'm going to move this over here and left click place it. And now I want to actually select vertex. I think that's going to be what we want. And now what's going to happen is a little circle is going to pop up. If I hit G, you see that little circle that popped up right there? If I left click and place it, that is now perfectly in the corner. 100% in the corner. It's perfectly lined up. If I hit Control 7, there we go. It's kind of bleeding through, but it's okay. You can see how perfectly it's lined up. So snapping is pretty useful. Now let's actually go ahead and I'll use this one. Just gonna move it over here a little bit. I'm gonna tab into edit mode. I'm on edge select. If I grab this edge and then shift select this edge, I could hit scale and scale this in. And it's going to modify the mesh. Now, what you'd want to do is hit maybe S because you're on the axis here. And green is Y, red is X. So I'm kind of facing this way. So I would take this and hit S and then Y and scale that in just a little bit. And Control Z back if you don't like what you got. And then, so I wouldn't really scale it, this object in that manner, but you can. Let's see, one more thing here. So now if you were going to just kind of move the mesh around, manipulate it, you could hit G and Z while you're in edge mode. And this is a good way to keep stuff nice and even. Tab out of that. Let's go to hit 3 on the number pad. You can select face, hit I to inset, E to extrude, and you'll realize real quick that snapping is still on. So you'll turn the magnet off and hit I, inset, E will extrude. And then you can kind of come back out to object mode, and now you're creating some different shapes. Now from here, you could do something really nice. Like come over to the modifier properties, and you could add a bevel. And it'll add a bevel to the entire mesh. You have to do a few things to clean it up. Number of segments don't work. You have to put something even in there, something like 6. Kind of start off. You can see this corner doesn't look very good. So let's bring down geometry. And the miter outer can go from sharp to arc. It's going to fix that, make it look real nice. Clamp overlap can come off. So that way you can see what shading errors you might have had. You can go to the amount, hold down shift, and drag with the left mouse. Kind of change your bevel till it looks nice. Then drop down shading. You turn on hard normals. It'll fix most of the rest of the shading errors. And that's about it. I'll do another one of these beginner tutorials. Appreciate you guys watching. I'll smash that subscribe, smash that like, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.